Intersection Magazine Podcast.
Welcome to Intersection Magazine Podcast. About 2 months ago or less, one of the leading broadcasters from the UK did a week of programming covering technology and startup ecosystems. I think it would be interesting to share some of what stood out from about maybe 4 or 5 of those episodes to try to compare some of what they covered with what I've been doing, as well as, of course, glean insights from their coverage, what areas they sought to highlight, maybe so that those of you who are listening could also benefit. So this is the first of one of those episodes. It was covering Argentina's biotech startup ecosystem. I'm your host, Nicholas Kianda, for the Intersection Magazine Podcast. Thank you for listening, and thank you for subscribing. So the series covering Argentina's biotech startup ecosystem was presented by Natalio Gasoy. First of all, what the series sought to do, or the coverage of at least Argentina, wanted to give a bit of context in terms of what was going on, or what's the system like, what's the country like as we speak. One of the challenges that has been reported is one of inflation, as well as, of course, the idea that Argentina is losing quite a number of its citizens to other countries. So there's a fear that they're losing some of their greatest talents. Now, there is a company, in light of all of this, there's a company that has been able to achieve drought tolerance in soybean and wheat. And that's one of the companies that's under the umbrella of the biotech startup ecosystem. Now, when I have attempted to summarize some of what is going on in California with Silicon Valley as well as other ecosystems, but mainly Silicon Valley, because that's the model I have used for covering Uganda, for describing ecosystems in general. And for Silicon Valley, of course, we have the geography, the unique geography and the location, for example, of Stanford University, as well as a few other universities in the area. Then the Bay Area itself as an attractive place, at least in the early 90s to 80s, and maybe even you can go far back as the 70s. Then the gathering of the companies like Facebook and others that are located in the same area, the benefits that can be accrued from getting access to students from one of the top Ivy League schools in the country, businesses that are established there. Then, of course, the benefits that the country provides in terms of domiciling for those who want to establish, for example, in Delaware. So some of the insights or some of the ideas we've derived in describing a healthy ecosystem have come from analyzing what exists in California and Silicon Valley and saying, okay, first you have businesses, then you have universities, then you have a legal system that supports startups, then you've got business structures that enable you to establish or to set up and to have tax-friendly environments. You have incubators, you've got business accelerators, you have venture capital, you've got angel investors, you've got non-governmental organizations that are also supporting the infrastructure. And then we also attempted to connect the work of Michael Porter, who wrote about innovation clusters and how sometimes geographical areas can start to attract certain business interests and organically form clusters that, for example, as you have Idaho with its potatoes, and then potato chip companies, or maybe Silicon Valley with its technology companies. These are geographical areas that for some reason tend to attract businesses and clusters. And you can talk about Boeing and its location, or the location of formerly places like companies like McDonnell Douglas, or maybe Detroit with its vehicles, or other places of that nature. So we use the Silicon Valley model to at least help us analyze and understand what it takes to have a healthy technology and innovation ecosystem. Now, what I think was unique about this episode about Argentina is you have the ecosystem, which has several different aspects to it, but then you have a country that's leveraging just one small part of that ecosystem, focusing on biotechnology. Now, here's some of the things that have favored or that have allowed this kind of success to take place. First, the hosts mentioned public and private investment. Second, they also spoke about the benefits of ingenuity, or I suppose you can call it a scientific community. And then third, favorable conditions. Now, one of the things that I suppose was a bit of a challenge for Argentina is after they had their challenges with war, a lot of what had existed before in terms of infrastructure was drained. And then when new governments or new governance stepped in, then many farmers saw an opportunity where they could invest. Now, incidentally, one of the things that's interesting about Argentina's success is it has outpaced Brazil. What the people that have helped build the ecosystem say, though, in terms of biotech, is they have a very deliberate effort in scouting for scientists. One. The second thing that they do in it is that they don't not only scout for scientists, but they also invest in those scientists, and then they help them build. Now, an example of one of the startups that's been pretty successful, or I suppose is about to launch, is one that is established in a seaside town. They use shrimp cells, and from the shrimp cells they extract a polymer that enables more sustainable farming. Now, historically, this startup, for example, was set up by someone who had grown up using or watching those around them use pesticides, and they had grown up seeing the negative effects of pesticides. So when they grew up, when they had the means, when they had the education, they started looking for solutions that could cater for this kind of challenge, the challenge of pesticides. Now, Argentina, incidentally, is, I suppose, the third largest exporter of agrochemicals. So you have a startup ecosystem that identifies an area in which they're already excelling. In our case as Uganda, for example, or East Africa, you could say, if you look at maybe coffee, incidentally, Uganda has just bypassed Ethiopia in terms of coffee exports. The challenge we have is in value addition and making sure that we are not just making money from the ground, from the coffee, but we are also processing that coffee, because the money you can make with processed coffee is much more than the money you can make with selling beans. So the Argentinians recognized that they already had a market. They were already the leading producer of agrochemicals. So the biotech startup ecosystem and this particular entrepreneur decides that what can I do within the sector in which we're one of the largest exporters to boost or to ride upon the same wave, so that I can supply and solve a problem, as well as, of course, hopefully make some money. So this company is currently has a testing run in which they're looking at making use of the shrimp cells and extracting this polymer, and they've been doing this work, I suppose, since 2021. Now, one of the things that they've also tried to do as an ecosystem is they've made very rapid strides in public policy. Second is that they've invested risk capital. Third, what they've tried to do is make sure that they invest or they focus on homegrown talent. There are about, I suppose, 340 biotech companies, so clearly this is an area that they thrive in. This information comes from a 20-year study that also realized that there was they needed to focus their attention, or this ecosystem needed to focus their attention on sciences. So sciences had to be put at the heart of the sector. Now, we mentioned policy. So policy was supposed to help foster public-private partnerships for research and development. Then the third thing, or the third pillar that they realized they needed to focus on, was the strengthening of policies of national universities. And then they needed to also set up some kind of system for specialized funding for the startups. So for this, they have a group, I suppose, called SF 500. SF 500 is what has been set up to scout for scientists and entrepreneurs, to invest and work with them. And the focus of SF 500 is biotech, nanotech, and artificial intelligence. So from what we gathered in the conversation, they invest about $8 million USD. They're currently an early stage fund. They have thinking about maybe 20. They expect, I suppose they said they expect their returns in 10 to 20 years. 20 million USD in 4 to 5 years. Now, the other company the other thing that was a major turning point for the ecosystem, one of the things, of course, I mentioned was the wars, but the collapse of government brought together new farming practices, as well as an entrance, because when government was no longer funding the ecosystem, then private funding came in. So farmers noticed a gap which could be exploited. Now, one of the companies that we looked into, for example, that's in the biotech ecosystem, you have one company with upwards of 1,000 patents. When you listen to the episodes in which we featured Dr. McLean Sibanda, you will notice that he talks about the importance of intellectual property. You have two books, one devoted on herbs and the other devoted on the subject of intellectual property. So I mentioned before that one of the things that we noticed about the Tanzania and Zanzibar technology ecosystem, or at least the legal side, is they've tried to focus a lot on getting the startups to identify and to build intellectual property around the services or systems or structures that they're building. This ability to leverage intellectual property or patents allows a company to have a greater valuation. Now, for Argentina, apart from the things that I've already mentioned, they've also tried to focus on capital market listings. So this gives you, this creates a system that exists where companies can have something to look forward to in terms of exits and IPOs or initial public offerings. One of the other things that exists is, I suppose, with policies that are designed to strengthen national universities, is to help people that have a strong knowledge base or PhDs to transition or to connect with private sector, so that there's a bit of an understanding from academia, or a transition from academia, or interaction between academia and business. There is a National Science and Technical Research Council, which is CONICET. It's the main government agency that fosters development of science and technology in Argentina. It directs and coordinates most of the scientific and technical research done in universities and institutes. Has about maybe 11,000 researchers, 11,000 doctoral and postdoctoral fellows, 2,000, almost 3,000 technicians and professional support staff, and then maybe about 1,400 administrative employees. Now we're mentioning CONICET as well as the other group that I mentioned, SF500, to talk about how some of these systems are, government-based, and contrasting these and talking about how when the gap existed after the collapse of government before, private sector came into play. So for that, there is an organization or a business called Locky Labs. Locky Labs was created by a couple who recognized that people who had access to external opportunities and travel were coming back to Argentina with a much brighter outlook and a broader way of thinking. So they decided to set up something similar in Argentina, a place that was almost that presented everything that you'd benefit from if you travel to a more advanced technology and innovation ecosystem. But it essentially is a lab. It's an incubation space that allows startups to find all that they'd ever need to find in a vibrant ecosystem. Currently, they have about 8 companies, and what happens for these companies is you come in and you're able to have access to all the resources you need in the most challenging phase of your startup's growth, which is like your first 3 years. So that's what Locky Labs does. You can look up Locky Labs on the internet for a little bit more information. So in terms of, I suppose you can call them takeaways, I was surprised that you can have so much revenue or so much investment capital generated from a subsector or from a portion of the ecosystem. Usually when we talk about ecosystems, we think, of fintech, we think health tech, we think agri-tech, all sorts of technologies that are being built or that are coming under the startup ecosystem, and then we think about the funders or the, startup ecosystem enablers, etc., etc. But this is just one part of an ecosystem that's thriving and that's taken the country to a completely different level. So amazing just how much can be done if a country takes advantage of ecosystem subsectors, if you want to call them that, and in this case, biotech. So from the number that I mentioned before, I suppose 120 of the startups in Argentina are biotech startups. But just as I mentioned, there's one particular startup that has 1,000+ patents. That's a lot of leverage. That's a lot of value that they've created. So that's really what I think stood out for me in terms of looking at what Argentina is doing and some of the success areas that I've already mentioned. In terms of possible areas of collaboration, we could see, for example, case studies or benchmarking for those of you that are already in the biotech industry, that need to see a little bit more in terms of how a country that's predominantly or that has quite a lot of potential, or a continent that has a lot of potential in agriculture, can benefit from in terms of inputs and agrochemicals. So that's where I think we can benefit as an ecosystem. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. This is really just one part of a series where we'll be looking at how other bigger media organizations are covering the startup and technology ecosystem. In this case, this was from the BBC. I've been your host, Nicholas Ganda. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing.
Intersection Magazine Podcast.